Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Beer Enthusiasts. We have been on quite the hiatus. We're not going to be talking about a particular beer today, but we both did happen to bring different fresh hop beers. So I got a bunch of the different single hop ones that Breakside is doing, and this is their Mosaic single hop. And Chris has got Fremont. Do you know what hops are in there? What fresh hops are in there?
Does it say? I can't remember. The Cowiche Canyon is the one that they do. It's like their salmon safe fresh hop ale. And I thought it was the same every year, but I don't have it at the ready.
Okay.
But we didn't even talk about what kind of beer to bring to this episode because it wasn't primarily about a specific beer, and we both brought fresh hops anyway. So you can tell that we've been studying and drinking beer together for some time now.
Exactly. Yeah, but we still haven't lost a step. So
yeah,
still haven't lost a step. But yeah, Chris is kind of alluding to what the topic's going to be for this particular video. We had kind of come to a crossroads with some of all the styles that we were doing, kind of starting to have to really kind of dig for some really obscure styles. So we thought we'd give ourselves some time to kind of plan that out because we just took the Master Cicerone exam, and it seems like everybody who has some sort of content after they take the exam does like a rundown. So we might as well just join the club and do the same.
Yeah, and I figure it's fair to do that here because most of the reason why we even started this channel was an excuse to study for that exam. So that was our ulterior motive. It might have seemed fun in the moment, but it was just us learning more about styles and sensory and food pairing, and it was a good excuse to do something every single week. And so we'll talk more about how we think that paid off and those type of things. But we figured we'd let you know how it went and what it's like and all the stuff.
Yeah, and so I think that's it. I think this channel is kind of brings us into a good segue just to kind of talk about how we prepared. I think we should really start with kind of when we decided we were gonna sign up for the exam. There was like a solid couple of months where I know, especially for you, you were really wondering, should I take the 2023 exam? Because we had, I want to say we had ended up studying for something around 16 months. And so when we started, it was mostly weekly tasting practice, doing some off flavors, getting all of the spikes from Araxa, doing style panels, which, we've been doing for years at this point. We just have changed the format in which we do them, just moving from advanced to master. But yeah, talk through kind of what your thought process was in just thinking, okay, because everybody says just take the exam because your chances are so low, or nobody passes the first time, or when really in fact it is a very small percentage of people, and it is quite difficult. But what were take me back to that time in our lives.
Well, and for reference too, for us, we Scott finished up his advanced Cicerone toward the end of 2021, and I finished the tasting at the very beginning of 2022. And so we were at this a different crossroads, right? We both, I think, knew that we wanted to eventually take the master exam, but and we'll talk about pieces of good and maybe bad advice that we got later. But it seems like a lot of people's first attempt, they say, or just take it, because you're really don't have a good chance of passing anyway. See what it's like. And I was thinking about taking the 2023 exam, which we had only really been studying in earnest at that point. That would have been the summer of 2023 for the fall of 2023 exam. We'd only been studying for a little bit, and that thought was kind of creeping into my head, as much as we tried to fight it, because we're not the type of people to go on a fact-finding mission for $1,000. You know what I mean? It's like, if we're going to take the exam, we're going to take the exam. And so it turned into maybe a little bit less of, just to see what it's like. And it was I don't know, thinking, do we have enough momentum? Do we just take it and see how close we are? So not like the exam itself and the content is super duper foreign, but just like, can we get close, or whatever it might be? And I think we ultimately made the decision not to sign up for the 2023, and we don't have our results yet. We won't have them for a while from this year, but either way, I think it was a good decision, because what we did was firmly established our weekly study ritual. And so we had already been studying for several months before the 2023 exam. And it's like, okay, we're not going to take the 2023 exam. So now we have a full year to keep preparing and kind of hone in our studies. And I think this channel is a good illustration of the power of just doing something every week in getting ready for the exam. And so that's basically what we did. We had a tasting night every Wednesday for, 16 months by the time the exam rolled around. So over a year,
something around there.
Yeah, close to a year and a half.
I want to even go back a little bit before that, because I think even after you were done with advanced and we had both passed, I think we were both still kind of like, yeah, we're not sure if we want to take it, but we were very, we were very particular about not falling too far off because whenever you ramp up for any of the exams that you take, like that's kind of, when you go to take the exam, the hope is that you're at like the height of your tasting ability, your recall, all that, whatever's required for that particular level. And so we had started, kind of like a casual like tasting group via Zoom. We started doing, just kind of things that were more casual just to kind of keep us a little bit sharp. But then, firmly, 16 months ago, we were like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to be on the lookout for the Aroxa course. That was another thing where we were like, do we take it, now? Do we wait if I think we wanted to just sign up for it just in case we maybe decided to take the exam, because it's the week before. It's not one of those things where you kind of wait and see what's going to happen with Aroxa.
Yeah.
But we established the weekly tasting. We were doing stuff on Discord. We kind of started in the realm of kind of what we were used to for advanced. But instead of, doing stuff with like either matching or, answer bank stuff, it was just like either, short answer, fill in the blank. It was just, make it, the level of difficulty that we were trying to anticipate, but just, doing something in written form, gathering data. We're just starting to try and, gathering data is just part of the deal. People talk about, doing flashcards or doing all this other stuff. Like the first step is like, you've got a few like solid months where you're just trying to get to the depth of what you think you might need to learn. And then you can start doing recall.
Yeah. Well, and kind of delaying taking the exam until 2024 built us some time to have some educational beer experiences outside of our study group too. So we did a couple few of them together, and then Scott attended a couple of other big items as well. But we did the Micromatic Dispense Institute. We did kind of like almost like a internship at Admiral Malting. And then we did end up taking the Aroxa course in the fall of 2023, which was a week before the 2023 exam. And we kind of, we always had the thought like, if we're not taking it until 2024, maybe we'll take it again. And the Aroxa tasting course, I think, is as close as you can get to a unanimous recommendation for something to invest in to get ready for the master exam. I think you should think about it if they offer it again for any number of things, but it does help to put you at the height of your sensory abilities right in the lead up to the exam. And they typically host it the week before the master exam here in the United States. And then we didn't know this at the time, but they didn't get to host one before this year's exam. So it's a really damn good idea that we took it last year, because we learned so much about just studying flavor compounds and sensory in general, that what we did was invested in all the flavor spikes on our own. And we basically had a Aroxa class at my house once a week for a very, very long time. So I would echo that recommendation if they, for whatever reason, they weren't able to schedule it this year. But if you're thinking of taking the exam or just want basically the best sensory kind of week-long sensory class that's available, keep your eyes peeled for that and see if you can take it. But back to just studying for the exam, that was one of 3 big things that we got to do together. Scott also invested in doing a brewery retreat with Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. A bunch of other online resources in addition to the stuff that we were reading. And then as it got a little bit closer to the exam, I actually don't know exactly when we started this, but we added a study night where we were practicing oral exams. And so we would do tastings on Wednesday and then practice oral exams on Thursday. And that was just us showing up and giving each other, like proctoring an oral exam for each other. And we'll talk more about what paid off and what didn't. But we also, you do 10, 15, 20 of those and you start kind of running out of topics a little bit. And so, or not running out of topics, but getting deeper, kind of not really even knowing if that's going to be exactly how they ask some of the oral exams. But I think at some point we were practicing such particular knowledge areas that it really helped us. It was almost like we were practicing a really in-depth essay topic, but verbally, and you only have 10 minutes. And so, but it just goes to show you the power of doing something once a week, because it was, by the time the exam rolled around, we had done hundreds of sensory panels, between the off-flavor compounds, peppering each other with style identification panels. And then I don't think I've counted up the oral exams yet, but we had to have done, a few dozen basically.
Yeah.
By the time the exam came around, and that wasn't a product of studying for 10 hours a day and letting everything fall by the wayside. That was just in addition to whatever we were doing on our own. And then all the meanwhile too, we're doing this channel every once in a while, and that helped us with just food pairing ideas, just talking out loud about beer. If you take this exam, you're gonna have 12 oral exams. You might not know what they're gonna be about, but you're gonna be talking to an expert for 10 minutes about something that they know a lot more about than you. So it really helped with the comfort level too. It didn't seem so jarring to be in front of a Master Cicerone being grilled about some esoteric topic or whatever. And so that's just what we did for at least 16 months. And to your point as well, we didn't stop really in between the advanced exam and getting ready for the master exam. Obviously, we took some breaks, and we also kind of reinvented the way we were studying a couple of times, depending on what we had learned about what may or may not be on the exam or what would be necessary in terms of depth of research and stuff like that. But in essence, we didn't completely take a break. And we did that because we didn't want to create a situation where you're like relearning the same stuff that you already know, rememorizing things that you already had memorized. And so, you do lose it if you're not practicing. So we just tried to keep it going.
Yeah. Well, and we had somebody who, because there was kind of 4 of us to begin with, and then there was one person, and they were just like, feeling, whether or not it was actually the truth is not really the point, but them just feeling like they had so much catching up to do. Every week when they kind of expressed that, it was very much like, okay, like we definitely did the right thing. And, I think all the stuff that we kind of did keep up with, it wasn't like stats. It wasn't like commercial examples. It was just trying to make sure, because, that stuff you can kind of get back into the swing of things. We had just gotten a recent, the BJCP update was pretty recent. So that was really nice, just kind of knowing that, unless something ridiculous happens and we take this an obscene amount of times, we're going to be using the same stats for all of the exams that we, hopefully just the one, but all the exams that we take. And so just staying sharp, meeting once a week. Yeah. I think for styles alone, because we went back and finally we were like, can we just kind of look back at, and you were great because you just had them all in a notebook. And so you could actually go back and run the numbers on a lot of stuff. I kind of couldn't, could tell, and I could go back. It just took me a lot longer through all the pictures and stuff that I post. But I want to say when we were done, especially after doing some of the styles work right before the exam in Kansas City, I had done personally over like a little over, just barely over 900 style samples throughout that 60. And like you said, it's just the power of consistency.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I was doing it every single day and doing 2 panels a day. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It was just once a week. And I think for, off flavors, we were pretty routinely doing, for the vast majority of it, we were basically doing a flight of 8 with a control beer, and all 8 were spiked. We kind of peppered in some of the other panels near the end, just to kind of get some idea of what kind of strategy we wanted to employ for particular ones, where if we ran into a compound that we weren't super confident in, like, how do we, treat it on the, you treat them differently depending on the panel, right? If they're all spiked, then you obviously take a guess, right?
Yeah.
You don't just leave it blank. But if it's on the stop go, you might just want to, you might want to decide if you want to just put go on, if there's 2 left and you think one of them spiked, but you don't know, do you just kind of take the win and not try and throw a Hail Mary to get 100, and then end up with, getting 8 out of 10 instead of 9. So we peppered in some other stuff just to make sure we were kind of prepared. We quickly reminded ourselves how difficult the technical panel, already was for advanced, and how much harder it is for the master exam. But there were just like little pieces of advice that we just kept getting, where it just felt like, well, one, we were just like, where, we were like, Craig Thomas, like, where were you 6 months before the exam instead of 3 months before the exam? Because that was like another part of the evolution of the oral exams, was when we talked to Craig, he was just like, he said he felt like studying styles is just such a great base, because it leads to so many other things. When you learn about styles, you learn about process. When you learn about styles, you learn about ingredients. You get to learn about flavor profiles, and you think about how those all come together for, beer and food pairing. For specific styles, there's keeping and serving, specialties, that come up for different styles that are unique. Obviously when you're studying, British beers, you're thinking cask and all that kind of stuff. And when you're, thinking Czech beer, you're thinking of all the different pours that they traditionally do with side pull faucets. And so that was one where we were like, oh, okay, like, this is where kind of we want to. And so we started adding on just like doing style comparisons every week. And then that kind of felt like that took us up, another notch. And the other thing about just doing it consistently for so long is that I didn't feel like at the end that we just had to, like, I didn't have to have, like, because I was very fortunate. I was in the middle of a job change, and I just decided to quit my job at the brewery, and was going to just start my new job, right after the exam. And so I took the last 6 weeks off just to be able to study for the exam. But I still wasn't like, I have to study 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wasn't doing that, because some of it, I was just like, I can, I'm going over a lot of the stuff for like the 100th time.
Yeah.
And so doing it for 8 hours was almost at some point would have actually been detrimental in some ways.
Well, I think that's a good segue too to talking about getting to Kansas City, and kind of what we did to lead up to the exam, and then we can talk about what we think worked, what we might change, and some of those other things, because there are a lot of like really kind of read between the lines lessons in there, and it has a lot to do with styles too. I remember shortly before we talked to Craig, who was gracious with his time, and just like we can't tell you the content of what's on the exam. The kind of funny thing is the exam is basically outlined online. They tell you exactly like what kind of tasting panels there are going to be, so you can practice those. There's a sample tasting exam on the website. We were presented with the same format of those, and so they have the potential to change that at any given time, but it was identical. But really funny short thing on that is, just before we're talking to Craig, and his like best advice was essentially that you can't overstudy styles, because it just bleeds into all areas of the exam. We had a little study night where we just did the questions that are on the website, the sample essay prompts. And one of them is Saison for the style essay. And it said, kind of in your answer that you needed to pick several commercial examples of Saison that you think represent the breadth of the style and explain all the kind of, cracks and corners of Saison. And that was a little bit of a light bulb moment, because it was like, oh, this isn't just listing commercial examples. You have to know them, and you have to be able to explain kind of what area of that style that they represent. And, without giving away the specific content of the exam, it was just like that on the exam. They're asking about a style, and they want you to talk about the whole range of the style, not just a couple of examples or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's where, because I definitely, heard from some people who were like, "Oh, it seems like you guys are doing," they're like, "We get off flavors. There's 29 of them. Like, it's a very, there's multiple panels that involve off flavors. So, and if they give you a commercial beer for technical that happens to have something like that, it's good to know." But people were like, "Oh, you're just doing styles. Like, it's one panel. Like, we get that it's really hard, but I was just, after, like you said, after doing it, just knowing and being able to serve each other like lots of different, examples that we could find, you start to develop like very good familiarity with specific commercial examples. I mean, there were definitely lots of times where, more than on one panel, sometimes more than 2 or 3 of the commercial examples, somebody would just be able to tell, what they were being served for the majority of those examples for those particular samples. And so, I think it's just another good like clue and thing that we realized was a good thing. Is just even tasting, you just cannot overdo it, because I mean, trust me, I did 900 samples and it was not a great panel on exam day for styles, and so it's just, we are definitely in a place where we can get a lot of commercial examples, but Kansas City has access to, different things, or doesn't have access to, certain things that we do that we, studied a lot. And so it can, you kind of feel like sometimes you got lucky, that they talked about something or asked about something. And sometimes you were like, gosh, man, we drank a lot of that beer and we didn't get anything even close to a style representing that, that particular beer. But it's still not something that you just. I think that's kind of a big thing where people are like, "Oh, I studied this thing and it just never, it just never came up," or it's. I don't think that's a super great reason to say that it's not a good idea, because they do try and make the exam pretty different. Mm-hmm. At the very least, even if it's maybe some similar content, they try and draw that information out of you in a different way. And speaking to that, I mean, we'll get to that once we talk about. I'll hold off on that until we get to the exam part. But talking about arriving, the funny part was how many people asked me if I was getting there the day before. Right. And I thought, are you just like absolutely out of your mind? Like, why would I get there the day before? And why would I not get adjusted to the time zone, get to cram some stuff, do some panels, do something, and I mean, the way things turned out, God, if we would have all gotten there the day before, Charlie ended up getting delayed and getting in at like 2:30, 2:40 in the morning. And he would have had to get up 3-4 hours later and would have just taken the exam on just fumes at that point, just adrenaline and pure, just pure fumes. And so it's like, don't get there unless it's absolutely necessary. Do everything you can to not get there the day before the exam. I would highly suggest that you not do that.
Well, and we the exam was on Monday, September 30th, and Tuesday, October 1st, and we got there Thursday, whatever day of the month that was. And if we have to take it again, we'll talk about that. But I would want to arrive about the same time. I think I could be okay if we had arrived on Friday or whatever, but day before, hard no. Got to get there early. And an experience that I had during the Aroxa class was that my sinuses killed me for the first couple of days of that class. And so I wanted to prevent that. I wanted to get to the locale, get to Kansas City and get used to the air and the time change and all of those things. And it ended up being, super, super important to feel like we were waking up on game day refreshed like it was any other day and just kind of ready to go. So yeah, we chose to get in on the Thursday before the exam started on a Monday. And we went to the store. The liquor store was kind of stop one. And we picked up, what's funny about this, and I won't give away the exact samples, but we're just checking out the store. It was a really nice store. And picking up a couple of commercial examples of things we didn't have access to in California where we live, or hadn't gotten before, or just felt like we needed one more pass on because it's kind of unique or whatever it was. And one of those beers that we ended up buying was on the exam. So it has a way of finding you. You end up studying the right things beforehand if you're crunching. And so, but our real goal was just to get some things that we're a little bit less familiar with, scope out the stores so that we could do some other panels for each other if we wanted to. And then Friday morning, we did a tour of Boulevard Brewing where the exam was held, which was great. Probably a little bit long, but I'm very, very happy that we just did it Friday morning and got it out of the way so that we could do everything else that we needed to. But I got to taste some Boulevard beers and see the brew house and kind of get a sneak peek at some of the areas. We didn't know exactly what parts of the building the exam would be held in, but kind of had a little bit of an idea. And also, Scott and I are the kind of people that get to the airport super early, so we wanted to scope out exactly where we needed to be early on Monday morning and stuff like that. But then that left the rest of Friday to do some studying. And our real big plan, we kind of had two big plans. One was to do a full slate of off flavors at least on Saturday. So the Saturday before the exam. And then you and I in particular, we didn't want to have to taste a million beers the day before the exam. So we wanted to kind of leave Sunday, the day before, to not drink alcohol, kind of, go over our notes, cram on a couple of things that we thought we needed, just kind of a little more book learning about. And that was kind of the setup. And I feel like that worked pretty well for us.
I agree.
I felt like we covered the bases that we wanted to cover, that we didn't have to cram too much. Like, it was hard to sleep for other reasons. It's just like the night before Christmas or whatever. So, it was, for me at least, it was a little bit less about like too many beer things roaming through my head and just being excited to take the exam. And so I highly recommend getting there early enough to get settled, check out the local beer scene a little bit, just to make sure you're not missing something glaring if you're taking the exam that's way in an area that's way out of yours. And anything else about arrival in Kansas City leading up to the exam?
No. I mean, the flavor practice was great. We had a couple of other people who were taking the exam come over. Rachel Hudson, it was her, third time taking the exam. Scott Plachecki, came too, and he was very, very happy to be able to get, his get a run through of all the off flavors. It had been a while since he last took the exam. But yeah, I think I thought that was a great day. We definitely took some time for just some stuff. It was like, let's just run through all of our notes that we have. Let's just make sure let's fill in any gaps that we have. It was definitely funny because, we're studying and it's like, 2 days before the exam and we're kind of looking at each other. We're like, this would have probably been smart to do like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
But we can only designate like so many evenings to to studying together that we and when we were going through it was I don't think anybody was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so glad I heard you talk about butyric acid because I thought it was just this one thing and that was it. Like we weren't all really that. It was like, oh, okay, like that's one more little like fun fact that I could throw in there. Oh, that's the exact name of the bacteria or whatever. Just little things that can be a little bit more technical sounding or a little bit more specific. So no, I think, and we went through some process troubleshooting stuff, kind of the same, kind of the same thing. We all had our own stuff that we wanted to do, on our own, whether it was just kind of, just getting, a read through of sellermanship, or, the draft quality manual, or just, any of the resources that are, obviously just things that you have to have a good, extensive knowledge of. But I mean, I was glad we did it. I mean, we're sitting there doing off flavors with Rachel, and she's like, oh yeah, this particular off flavor, like this is what it's like when I taste it. There was this sort of like, mouthfeel trigeminal like sensation that she mentioned, and it was like a light bulb for me. And
Yep.
that one happened to show up on the exam, and I got it right. And it was only because I had been struggling with that one. It was really hit or miss, kind of depended on how the spike was. If we had kind of concentrated the spike a little bit more, or sometimes it just seems like, depends on the day, that sometimes the spikes want to, kind of express in a different way. But I don't know. That's something I'm sure we'll talk about near the end. Just kind of the power of studying in a group.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so then day one of the exam, we had to get there. We had to get there pretty early, because Boulevard Brewing is not just a brewery. It is a campus.
Yep.
It's large. There's like Brew House 1 and Brew House 2. Like there's two separate. We're taking the tour, and each of the places has, each of the buildings has multiple floors. The building that we're kind of in, that's kind of our waiting area, where we're going to do all the essays and all of the tasting panels. That's kind of where everybody's waiting. And then once you get your schedule, so you can kind of see where you're supposed to be for the 10-minute oral exams. They introduce all of the different proctors. It's a host of Master Cicerones who work for Cicerone. They had Avery Swanson was there, who's a Master Cicerone. They had somebody from New Belgium who's like the field quality manager, who's also, in the program. I think he's certified, but, veteran of the, from what I've heard, veteran of the master exam proctoring it, not his first go around, super familiar. So they introduce you to them. They kind of show you where they're all going to be, and where, what the names of all the different places are that you need to go for your oral exam, because it's kind of your responsibility to, be keeping track of the time and going to where you need to go, and being there, and being there on time. But I mean, once you get in there, I mean, one of the things a lot of people say is, the proctors are great, and they want you to pass, and they want to make sure you have an opportunity to get as many points as possible. And that definitely rang true. I mean, didn't feel that anything different than that.
Yeah, and it felt great and welcoming. I mean, you got to remember too that the Master Cicerones involved in proctoring and administering the exam had to take the same exam. So they're the ones that know how you're feeling more than anybody, and several of them took it multiple times. So there's no like, one-upping each other, or chest puffed out. Maybe it used to be like that, but I felt that there was a little bit of unspoken camaraderie. We were all kind of there to try to accomplish the same thing. And one of the things that I've liked about in the program, and had to convince myself to, is really, I'm not competing against you. I'm not competing against my friends that I'm studying with. I'm competing with myself to see if I can get to a certain level. Because no matter how, you do, or on our buddy on a deep, or Charlie, or whoever, it's up to me at the end of the day. And I kind of felt that during the exam too. Everybody was friendly. For context, 11 of us took the exam. And it was a real wide range of experience too. There were, myself, Scott, and a gentleman named Adam were the first time takers. Everybody else had taken it at least one time before. But I thought it was really interesting that there was also a mix of people that had taken it 2 or 3 years, like in a row, but then also a few people that had took it once a long time ago and have circled back to take it again. And so it was almost like 3 different classes of experience, right? There's the newbies, there's people that are going way back to reach for experience from their previous exam, and then some people that are going for second shot or third shot or whatever it may be. And there was no bullshit about that either. Everyone's just very honest about, took it last year, or I took it the year before, or I took it 10 years ago. And, we were kind of not playing dumb, but just we don't know what to expect other than like literally what we know about the format of the exam. I just thought it was great. I thought it was a good group, good cohort. Our friend Max Finance mentioned it on comments on Instagram, that just thought this was another good cohort, and a bunch of, I don't know, it's cool to be in a room with that many like-minded and obviously just absurdly talented and smart individuals. So that was it. The exam was duplicated over 2 days. It was like taking a carbon copy of the schedule the next day. So we had half of our oral exams on morning one, and then a couple of tasting panels, a 3-hour essay session, a couple more tasting panels, and that repeated the next day. Obviously, the content's different. They don't ask you the same questions, but that all culminated in having taken 16 essay questions, 12 oral exams, and 8 tasting panels. And it was grueling.
Yeah. The exam, I've said it on many different, mediums now, but the exam, it lives up to the hype. It's just as hard as as everybody says it is. Nobody's trying to puff up the exam because maybe they had to take it 3 times. And so they're trying to, look how hard. No, it's just hard. It's just it's a very difficult exam. I think we should just kind of talk a little bit about how we felt our trajectory was from the start.
Yeah.
So obviously, you kind of, the hope is that you kind of get off to a good start, especially I think if you're a first time taker, you're not sure, you kind of have an idea of some stuff because there's some stuff that traditionally it seems like they do every time, but they mix up, how exactly they do it. So there's maybe a very broad category or subject that they do, but they'll touch on different parts of it, or they'll use, different, parts of a draft system to talk about, or whatever it is. And of course, the first one I had no break, went straight into an oral exam, and it was literally the one that I would choose not to have to do first. Like if I got to pick, and that was the only thing I got to choose about my schedule, that would be the oral exam that I did not, want to do first.
Yep.
But looking back on it, I probably shouldn't have been as because I didn't feel like I, kind of did what I was supposed to do. And so I kind of was a little bummed about that and leaving. And then I kind of got to the next oral exam, and I'm sitting across from, Dan Emdike, who's one of the new owners of Cicerone. And, he's asking me a question that I know. And so I'm like, okay, I know a lot about this subject. I think I can, and then I just kind of started, kind of fumbling. But then finally it was just like, you got to because one of the other really good pieces of advice that I've heard plenty of people say is there's just too many aspects of the exam, one after the other, where if you just have a bad one and you just kind of dwell on it for too long, you're just, because you don't have very many.
Yeah.
And it kind of depends on what part of the exam it is too, because, the weighting is so, is so different. The essays are worth a lot, and then the oral exams, and then the tasting exam. So, maybe you can do really poorly on maybe one, essay, maybe a couple of, oral exam, it kind of depends on that part of it, but you don't want to be giving them away on the first day and the first 2, oral exams that you're doing. Mm-hmm. But, kind of felt like I snapped out of it. It felt like I finished strong there, then had another really strong one in the brew house, had another one after that I thought was really good. There was a particular, set of oral exams that I was, kind of convincing myself that I really needed to kind of study at the last minute. But, looking back on it, I think I just, maybe was kind of underestimating where I was, because just felt like every time I did one that was in that part of the syllabus, just felt like it was just like flow state, going super well. Was wondering after the whole thing was over why I was worried all that much about that. But then felt like I kind of finished, strong at the end of the day. We did the tasting. I thought the tasting went the 2 tasting panels we did right out of the gate went really well. The essays were very interesting. I think there was definitely more than, a few people who afterwards were like, yeah, when, Neil said that, you have 3 hours, and they said, yeah, when Neil said there was an hour left, I had, more essays than I was planning, because you're kind of ideally you're thinking, okay, you've got 22 and a half minutes per essay. You're thinking there's some that you can get done, quicker because you're either good at it or just the subject matter. If you can kind of figure it out, then you can work through it and kind of save some time. But a lot of people, including myself, when Neil said there was an hour left, I was like, I have 5 more essays that I need to do. Yep. And so it is time to hit the gas on a couple of these and just make sure that, because my big thing was like, just give them as many opportunities to award me points as possible. Because if you leave it blank, there's nothing they can do. They cannot make any assumptions. They just, it's an easy 0 for that section, that essay, that whatever it is. And I just thought, if I can just write something where even if they can, award me 50 points out of 100 or 60 points, that's just better than getting, and then I get the rest of the sections wrong, or it's not detailed enough, or, whatever the reason is that they don't, award points, but just never leaving it blank. And I was able to do that, and actually felt pretty good about how I recovered. Felt like I got 2 out of the way that were pretty, that I got through relatively quickly, and then got to put in the amount of detail that I would have wanted with the other ones. And then the other thing too with the essays is you're just wondering how your hand's going to do. Mm-hmm. You're wondering it because it's just a lot of writing, and you're also writing for the technical panel and other parts of the, of the tasting portion. You're writing on these sheets of paper. But that turned out to be okay. Like the first hour just sucks, like you're in pain, but then my hand just kind of went numb, and then it was pretty much just like trying to stay focused at that point. But felt like at the end of the day, it was like not the subject matter that I would have, wanted to just, if it was just based on one day, that was not the day that I would have anticipated wanting to do. So it was just like, try and get through that day thinking you still have a shot. And then the next days kind of was more, the stuff that I think I'm better at, know a little bit more about, a little bit more experience in. And then kind of have an above average day, and just try and hope that, you hit 85. But what about you? Walk us through kind of the arc of your first day.
Well, so somewhat similar to you. And when, the first cautionary tale is your first oral exam is when it is essentially there's like a kind of a 3-hour block in the morning. And they could change the schedule in the future. It's not necessarily always like this, but ours was, we were all doing oral exams at the same time. And so there were 6 oral exams being conducted, but you would have typically oral exam on, and then like a 15-minute break, oral exam 2 in a different room, then a 15-minute break. Once in a blue moon, you had 2 back to back or whatever, so that they could fit them in, right? But my first one was at 8 o'clock at the start time. I didn't start with a break. And what's so interesting is we practiced so many oral exams, and I felt like by the end of our practicing, we were practicing more complex oral exams than we were receiving too. So that was good. And we developed like a really good cadence and kind of rhythm for going through an oral exam. Cause it's when you first start practicing them, 10 minutes just flies by, and it doesn't feel like you can say enough things about the topic. As you practice and you get good at, saying your thoughts out loud and actually answering the question and getting in the rhythm, that's much better. But the funny thing is, and the reason I bring it all up, is my first oral exam. This is my first Master Cicerone test thing ever, right? And I walk into this room for my first oral exam, and your processes that you've developed have a way of escaping you in the moment, even though you practiced a lot.
I know.
And so that is the... if I could do it again, or if I have to do it again, that is, something that I will counsel to myself, and something I would say to you is, remind yourself that they're just proctoring the oral exam. They want you to do well, and just don't forget your processes and the way that you practiced. Because if you go in and you just have even just a fraction of a freak out moment, it's going to throw your whole oral exam off. And that's basically what it did to my first oral exam. I won't be receiving a very good score on that one. But much like you, my next one, I felt like I hit it out of the park. And it was like, okay, you functionally, luckily, you don't have enough time to dwell on it. You just have to go to the next oral exam. But but I did do really well, I thought, on the second oral exam. So it's like, okay, I can get in the rhythm. We can put this one behind. It sucks that it happened right out of the gate, but it is what it is. And I felt like I finished the oral exams pretty strong. I thought I had one. So we had 6 of them on day one. And I felt like, I bombed that one. And then I had 4 really good ones, like good to great. And then one that is maybe average, and that's kind of what I can live with at the end of the day. Then we had a couple of tasting panels. I had more mixed results on that. A lot of stuff that I knew about in terms of my strengths and weaknesses in tasting. So that is what it is. And then honestly, my biggest takeaway from taking the exam and the single thing that I underestimated the most was time management, and particularly on the essays. And I think an interesting way to think about it too is if you've studied and you're ready for this level of material, you can write for more than 22 minutes on all of these topics. So that's kind of the push and pull, is you have to think to yourself, have I sufficiently answered this question so that I can move on? Because you get all 8 essays at the same time. So you can read them all at the beginning of your 3-hour session. You can kind of strategize. You can answer them out of order. As long as you label the pages, it's up to you. But the thing is you kind of have to keep an internal timer on how long you're taking on some of these questions and making up time where you can, so that you have a lot of time. Like if on a style essay, if they ask you to fully describe 5 beers, I mean, that just takes a long time. And if you're of an age like us where you haven't done a whole lot of handwriting in the last 20 years, that's the other part of it too. You can't just type really fast to make up for it. So, should I be taking it again? I will be thinking a lot more critically about the time management. But like you, I made sure the essays they all have multiple parts, right? And they say how much each section is worth. There may be an A, B, C, and D that you have to answer, and it'll say A is worth 20 points, B is worth 30 points, or whatever it is. And you're kind of looking at these like, oh man, I can't leave that blank. That's 40 points or whatever it is. And I at least got to get some of those points. And so, a lot of folks felt like they didn't get to certain essays with enough time. But like you, I tried to make sure that I had an answer for everything, so that I at least would get some type of credit for every section. And so I didn't drop anything or completely not get to something, which is something that I'm proud about. Just making sure that I got some of the answer on the page. And so, yeah, but the time management was brutal. And like you said, you kind of get in the zone, or maybe you're just powering through. It's like instinct. Your hand probably does really hurt, but you have no choice but to keep going. And fast forwarding to day 2, the real kick in the pants was you finish your essay, and there's kind of this relief, the last essay is done, and it feels like the exam should be done. And there are 2 more tasting panels before you're done. And they're 2 like hard ones that you have to do. In particular, one's a full technical write-up of 4 beers in 15 minutes. So you're writing super duper fast for that. And so just when you think you're done, you're not even close to done, at least in spirit. And so, yeah, that's my biggest takeaway is time management, and just being very, very cognizant of how much time you actually have, and try to strategize about how quickly you need to answer some things.
Yeah, and I think that's one spot where I maybe got a little fortunate on day 1, is that, you're talking about the different sections. And I think one of the questions that I decided to leave till the end, there were 2 sections, and one section, it was the amount of points was heavily weighted, to one, I don't think there was another essay where it was weighted like that. A lot of them were relatively even, or kind of, like you said, kind of split up between like 5 different sections. But there was one where it was like, oh, if you just do this one, like you're a good portion of the way there. And so if you leave that, and you only need to, and you do have to leave something blank, like you want to leave that, you want to answer that one and leave the other one blank. And so I think what we also kind of realized as we were kind of processing day 1 is that we finally realized what people were talking about when they said you should just take the exam because you're not going to pass. We realized it's probably not necessarily because the bottom line is people don't know this about each other. For the most part, unless you're studying together like us. But it's not the depth. They're not saying you just have no idea what the depth of knowledge is, or that's kind of a common thing. You just have to know how to strategize best. You just have to understand what is the best way to tackle the exam. What is the way that you're the most comfortable with? Also understanding how something might need to how you might need to pivot in the moment where you might get a question from a section that you might think you're usually good at, but for that particular year, just the way they're asking you and drawing that information out is just not clicking. It's just not, there's some portion, that's one of my biggest regrets, going into day two was there was just one particular, essay where in the third section, they were like, we want you to describe it. And they mentioned something from a previous section, but to me, it was not clear whether it was the previous section or from the original part of the question where they're kind of describing the aspects of the scenario that you're in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know which one of these I'm supposed to actually be talking about. It's not it doesn't just say from section B or the original thing. And the thing I wish I would have done was just gotten up but it's hard because you don't want to get up and ask, because then do you get some of that time back? Or do you just have to wait for them to answer you? And then if it takes them 90 seconds, then that's, 90 seconds is a lot. I mean, if you're saving certain parts of the exam, stats or commercial examples to the end, just to kind of fill in, 90 seconds is everything. That's enough to, the difference between getting an extremely good grade, on an exam and get something that's relatively average. But, speaking of that, that's another thing that was always kind of in the back of my mind, is hearing so many people who had, the way they told it. And, maybe it was because they just didn't pass that year, or they really knew that that's what, kind of was the nail in the coffin for them. But them just kind of having an essay that they thought was really good, maybe let's just say it was an 85, but then they were just like, I really want this to be a 95.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they get to the last one and they can write 2 sentences and then time is up. So that's the one thing I was really trying to guard against, was just spending so much time on an essay. And because this is something they tell you. I mean, this is in an email beforehand. They literally just say, just ask, answer what is asked. We cannot award bonus points for fun facts that you tell us about the subject that we're not really, doesn't matter if you can quote, something from a book or a podcast, by Charlie Bamforth on the subject. If it's not really related to the subject, they don't really, I think that's another thing where people are like, oh, you want to try and display knowledge. Like, that's what a lot of people say. And it's like, but you got to really got to stay on topic, because these are leading you down a very, very specific road, and you really can't deviate too far, because you're just, at the end of the day, it's just going to be a waste.
Well, and I think this is a good point to talk about what I think is the top of most people's mind, is the difference between the advanced level and the master level. And it's a little bit difficult to encapsulate in parts, but I really do think, the master exam content, like the subject areas, is not that much more, right? It is more, but the syllabi are very close. You can see where a couple extra things of particular note, the number of off flavors and flavor compounds that are added to the master syllabus versus the advanced. But really, it's not that much. It's like the advanced is already 90 something styles that are listed, and the master's 104. So it's like, when you're in the 90s, memorizing 10 more is not the end of the world. So when I think the real big difference is, aside from the depth that you may be asked to go on some of the knowledge areas, is you really just have to know it, like in the sense that you're making a lot of snap judgments when you take the exam, because every moment that you're thinking of a food pairing that you want to use, or you're trying to pull a commercial example from the deep recesses of your memory, or you're confused about a question and you have to reread it, that all trades off with getting ink on the paper, and just making a quick, close read of the question and getting going, because you don't have any time to waste. So I think that for me, that's the main difference, is a lot of the subject matter is similar, but you have to know it like the back of your hand a little bit more on the master exam, and be able to just answer as quickly as humanly possible, because you also can't afford, and you have to make a good judgment quickly, right? You can't afford to be 3/4 of the way through explaining a commercial example and realize that it's a commercial example of a different style, or that it
Yeah.
doesn't
Or
encapsulate the
they
argument
asked,
the way you wanted.
yeah, or they ask for a Trappist beer and you talk about, a beer from Omagong or from,
Yeah.
Allagash, and then
Yeah.
you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, or St. Bernardus, and you're like, that's actually not a Trappist brewery. And then
Yeah.
you've spent all that time. That was something I was personally afraid of, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and so I think that's the main difference. I really think in the second one, and this is related to time, but on the advanced exam, the written includes a lot of like multiple choice and matching style questions where if you're really good at those, you can bank a lot of time essentially and get to your essays faster. There's none of that on the master exam. It's just 16 essays over 2 days, and you've got your time allotted to you, and you can only save time on a different essay, not
Yeah.
some other section of the exam. So so that was really, really tough.
And boy, if you're worried about your hand hurting on day one, wait till you get to day two. You're just dreading day two. And of course, for me, day two starts pretty much the exact same way, exact same proctor, exact same similar part of the syllabus, and I'm just like, God, I would really like to just get off it. And and for me, this other one I would say was, one I was even less good at than the, oral exam I had for day one, and that subject matter and that part of the syllabus. And I just thought, okay, we just got to get through this. And then, but then even better than the day before, I felt like the next four, I was like, that was a bad score, but we totally made up for that one. Like I felt like I did super duper well on those. And then just really wish that last one, I wish I would have kind of capped it off with like 5 out of 6. But not super happy with how the last one went. Again, kind of similar section of the syllabus, but also one that was kind of a good reminder, about it kind of, there's certain strategies that you employ and things that you decide not to study for whatever reason. And this was, I don't think it kind of got, everybody, and it was fair. It was not a tricky question. It was within, it's not, I mean, nobody would be able to, to say anything about the legitimacy of this oral exam, but it was definitely one of those things where if you took, a particular kind of philosophy going into the exam about what to study, this was like, just don't forget, we can actually do that, and we just might, and just for one of them, it's not like everybody's like, gosh, there's a lot of these where it's kind of all seeming like they're kind of like this, and but it was just, and I was just like, okay, kind of wish we had that one back too, because I think that's stuff I knew, but just didn't put in enough time, and just happened to be part of the subject matter. But got to get back into the tasting. Thought the next 2 tasting panels went really well. Then the essays, again, I thought was a much better day for me. I had a couple of minutes left over at the end. Felt like I got to write a lot more, and be a lot more detailed. Got through all the essays. And then really my hand really just started giving out like 30 seconds left in the last panel, and I was like, I'll take that. I think that's because I've just heard way too many stories of people just like using their other hand to move their dominant hand or something out of control. And so, I was like, what if it's like starting to like convulse and like, be like twitching or whatnot and, spasming. If it's 30 seconds left, I'll take it.
You can definitely power through to a certain extent, but man, was it a struggle.
Yeah, it's tough.
And, something that that they don't always have to do this. It's something that we learned when we got our instructions for the exam. On day 2, we got a packet of 9 essay questions instead of 8, and you can skip one. And so there's strategy involved in that. And so there was some discussion between me and you. It's like, do you skip the one that you know a little bit less about? Or do you skip the one that's going to require like 6 pages to write about it and just save yourself some time and try to get a really good score on a shorter essay? And so, I'll leave.
Well, what did you end up doing? Not the question that you skipped, but what was in the moment? What kind of led you to make your decision on that?
Well, it was forced. My hand was forced in a way because of other time issues. And so, okay. first of all, bring a watch.
Yes,
Okay.
just a watch that you can tell time on. It doesn't have to, don't
Yeah.
bring your Apple Watch. They're not going to let you wear your Apple Watch.
Yeah.
But just get yourself a nice Superman, Batman, whatever, Wonder Woman watch that just tells time.
Yep.
And you just can throw away after the exam's over. But gosh, was that just man?
Because they, they're great about calling time or whatever and kind of letting you know, but the essays, feel in parts like an eternity has gone by, and in other parts like 2 seconds has gone by, and you've barely gotten to do something. And long story short, it was a little bit closer to your day one experience where they announced an hour left. And what I had done was I had left 2 questions, so we got to skip one of questions 3 through 7. So there were 5. Is that 5 or 4? 3, 4, 5, 6, 5. So there were 5 questions of which we got to skip one. So I answered 3 of those, and I was kind of having a little battle with myself about which of the remaining 2 I was going to leave. So I just left that for last. I go finish the rest of the essay set, and they say there's an hour left when I'm what feels like halfway through question 7, and so I have all of question 8, and then have to go back for the question and make the decision on which of the 2 essays that I left to skip. And so that just felt like no time, and I still had so much. And so literally the decision was taken for me when I had like a half an hour left, and I flipped the page to go back to one of the questions, and I just answered the first one I flipped to, because I couldn't even afford the 15 seconds to think about it again. I just needed to get more ink on the page. And so that was not a very educated and strategic way of doing it. I would definitely make that decision much earlier. But my plan was to answer the one that I knew more about, even if it took a little bit longer. And so I was thrown off of that a little bit just by the way that the time shuffled out. But what was yours was a little bit different, right? Potentially.
Yeah, mine was much different because I looked at all of the questions at the start, and because another thing for me is like I can be a little bit scattered, but when I was practicing, I tried to figure out how I could maybe use that to my advantage. And so there were parts of it where it was, if I know everything, and then my ADHD brain decides that, while I'm doing this question that, on this section of the syllabus, and like you said, they want a particular pairing with a particular style. If I get distracted and think of that, then I can just go write it down.
Yeah.
And then by the time I get to that, it's like, okay, cool. I have all the different, I've fulfilled all of the requirements that they want for that pairing. And then when I get there, I don't have to think about what those are. I can just start to, describe them. But really for me, it was, I was looking through and there was one question, and the majority of maybe not the majority, but a good, portion of the point, more than I was comfortable with. I read through what they were asking for, and it did not immediately come to mind. And I would have had to think a lot about what those were, and would have had to make probably some educated guesses. And then the other one, like over half the points in one section, was something that I knew like the back of my hand. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, this is super easy. Like, it was, again, it wasn't, to me, it was, it felt forced. It just happened to be, I was very fortunate that it was, kind of in the right direction, because it could have been, the other way around where, it's like, well, I know a lot about all that other stuff, but I don't know about the one thing, and it's worth, a lot of the points. And over here, I know a lot, but, maybe it's only worth a third. So I felt like it kind of fell in my favor that, the section that I knew, the question that I knew a lot about, that particular section, I, pretty sure I got the vast majority, if not all of those points. And there was only one part where I was like, oh, I kind of got to think about this for a second, but felt like I was felt like I knew what they were asking for. So that happened pretty quick. I mean, that probably took about 10 seconds to really kind of just double check and decide. But that one felt like it was decided for me as well, but kind of fell in my
well, and that one, that one ended up, but mostly because of time, but also if I had infinite time to decide which one to answer, I would have picked the one that you did. And and not the one that I did. And so that's going to end up being my worst essay score by far. And it's not really about the subject matter. If I had the time to sit down and write it, I think I would have been okay. It was a very difficult question, but
Yeah.
but it really was about time. It was just like, all this is happening. We're toward the end of day 2. This is the last thing I have to do, so I'm just going for it. And that'll be, you kind of already referenced earlier, you feel like you can maybe give away a little bit on this exam. And so, if my one essay where I gave a little bit and maybe too much, we'll see, is that one that I had to loop back and answer at the end. But that was definitely, they don't have to give you the option of skipping one. That's not like built into the rules of the exam or anything, but it does seem like they have been doing that for a while. And so that's something to think about if you're going to tackle the exam, is how you're going to want to approach that. If you're allowed to skip a question, kind of what your strategy is going to be.
Yeah, and I think we, kind of speaking to your, like, it's just about how much time you have. I think, and I would venture to say that, probably everybody would have, one thing they'd want to know. But I mean, for me, especially because it was the same proctor, for 2 of the ones that I just did not do well on the oral exams, there's just certain things where, like, you either answer an essay or you've done a tasting panel, or you're finished doing oral exams, with the same proctor, and you've done an oral exam with them on both days. And you either just want to write on the piece of paper, or just, I was really tempted when this person was leaving. I just wanted to be like, look, like, I swear to you, I know a good amount about beer. Like, I swear, like, I know what you saw in there. You would have wondered why I'm here, but maybe to ask this proctor about this particular one, and then maybe you'll see where the balance kind of. But God, because there's just some people where you just want to look and you're like, I swear, like, I studied for this, like, I really prepared. I'm not just like walking in here thinking like, oh, I'm gonna just pass this exam or whatever. Because there's just somewhere you wish you could have it back.
Well, and that's a funny moment after the exam that I had, was when we're all sitting, and all the weight is off of our shoulders. We're done. What's done is done. And we're having a beer down in the Boulevard tap room. And I was just like, the different perceptions of what some of these proctors must have of some of us is wild. Like, they probably had beers on night 1, and they were like, that Chris Crow is amazing. And the other person was like, really? Are you sure?
Oh, and then one of the other surprising things too, especially, on the first day of the exam, because, everybody's asking, oh, do you know how many people are taking the exam? Do you know anybody else who's taking it? There's some people who it seems like they've said they're going to take it, but you're not sure. But man, I was pretty surprised at how many people were there who I had just never even either didn't know they were taking the exam, or had never, or they followed us on Instagram the week before. And I'll say this with the caveat that there's definitely people who like to study in groups, definitely people who, like to, be lone wolf, like to do their own thing. And that's totally what's more comfortable for them. But gosh, I just would have thought that because it felt like most people knew that we were going to be there. I mean, we've had our studying be pretty public via social media and through this channel and all sorts of other mediums. But I just, like, there was one person where I was just like, do you just not like studying in a group? And he was like, no, like, I was really, and I was just like, how did we not know that you existed until today or until last week? Because even last week when they followed us, I wasn't sure they were taking the exam. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a bunch of content, like, posted, and he was, and, I got to share a row with him on the plane ride, back to, on a connecting flight to Denver. And he just goes, yeah, that probably wasn't the best, the best decision not to. And I was just like, dude, like, if we all have to take this again, like, there is the only reason I think that I have, because the good thing, and I think it's, for both of us, I think the best feeling is, well, one, the best feeling is when Avery Swanson says after the exam, you both definitely belonged here. Yep. That, like, was extremely humbling. And I'm so glad that she shared that with us, because that means a lot. But then, also I think the good part is that, neither of us are just like, we 100% didn't, neither of us are just like, just waiting for them to give me the certification. But the fact that you just have a chance, that is a really good feeling in and of itself, even if it's, a 30% chance or a 20% chance, like, even just the fact that it is a non-zero chance that if some of the partial credit that they could give or not give, kind of falls in your direction, or you whatever it is, the off flavor that you missed, like everybody else gets it wrong, and so they think, gosh, like if everybody got it wrong, like then was there something up? So maybe we'll give everybody partial credit. So there's a ton of that throughout the exam, because it's such a long exam and there's so much content, and there's proctors, and proctors also kind of have to get into their groove too. This is a big deal for them. They understand that, like, how well they proctor that oral exam for you. They're trying to make sure you have an opportunity to get as many points as you can, and that they're set up for you, and that they have everything kind of in place, and nothing's missing or out of place that needs to be there or not be there. So there's they've got to get it. So there's just tons of places that we could potentially either think we're just like that nobody got that right. There was a style we got on the style panel, and we were like, don't think anybody called that particular style. Maybe somebody did. But there's just some parts of the exam that are extremely difficult, and so it's not surprising that they could, because I would rather have them do something where it's just like that is overtly maybe too difficult, rather than them consistently just having questions or oral exams where it's like, well, like that kind of didn't, it was a little short of, that they're not wanting anybody to say, oh yeah, those couple of things, that was more like advanced plus than master. Like I think you want to be leaning to that other side, right?
Well, and I think everything is at a higher bar in terms of difficulty on this exam, but not all difficulties are created equal. Some of it was depth of knowledge about something. Some of it you kind of alluded to, but it was like a real throwback question. And if you would think it was something super basic that maybe shouldn't be on the master exam, but I tell you what, I bet you there are not a lot of extremely good scores on that oral exam, because you kind of get to, the deeper levels of studying scientific papers, and your third, fourth, and fifth sources on things, and you've got all your note cards, and you just you forgot something that is maybe on level 2 that you need to remember. And that's what I really enjoyed about that question, even though I didn't do as well as I should have. Is there's no, don't forget the fundamentals is what I'm trying to say. Because that's hard too. You're learning all this new exciting stuff, trying to keep 1,000 factoids in your head, but don't forget some of the basic stuff too.
Yes, absolutely. Anything else that we kind of didn't touch on, that how we would maybe prepare differently if we have to, obviously hoping that we don't have to take it again. But, I think the biggest one was just having every time we did any panel or I studied anything, I just had a timer in front of me. It wasn't necessarily my phone, even if it was a kitchen timer, but not having a timer in front of you, so you can just kind of always be checking about how your pace is, like that was very different. We probably won't be doing that again. I think there's some other little things where it's like, oh, okay, like you can't really always study 2 exam conditions, because sometimes it'll just depend on where the exam is and what kind of stuff is available to them or not available to them. We're not sitting at individual, desks. We're sitting at our large kitchen tables, and we can kind of move papers around when we're doing essays, and we can do all this stuff. But, for the tasting exam, some of us were just at these little tiny, circular tables. And I was like, I'm used to having a little bit more room than this to kind of operate. And, just little things that, probably didn't end up making that, that big of a difference, because we had practiced. And so I think whatever sort of interesting scenario we would have been put in, we would have been able to figure it out. But definitely some small. Again, I think we just gleaned a lot of strategy from this experience, and I think we'll be pretty poised to. I'd be a little surprised if either of us had a lot of points to make up. That's one thing I will say I'm pretty confident in. Like, definitely would never bet on me passing. But if they were like, yeah, you got a 70, I would be like, really? I got a 7? I would be like, wow, okay. Like, that's, there's definitely a threshold where I feel like I did, that I did, this well, I would think. But I think the great thing is that we'll be within striking distance, to say the least. And we'll be, have the experience of taking the exam, and we'll be, poised to give it an even better shot next year if we have to.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the moral of our story, is we delayed taking the exam on purpose because we wanted to not just show up thinking we weren't going to pass anyway. And I think we really put that foot forward. I felt like I didn't feel like any of the subject matter was over my head. I felt, good to very good about how I conducted myself during a lot of the exam. And I think if I have to take it again, it's just about minimizing those cobwebs that you have to shake off for that first oral exam, making sure not to forget your processes and really, really keeping track of your time and having better time management. I don't think that we would have to reinvent the wheel if we have to take it again. We're just tighten up a few things. And so we'll know in roughly 6 more weeks, maybe. We're a week out of having taken the exam, and they have a large task ahead of us. 11 people wrote 16 essay questions, so there's a lot of essays to grade, and so I don't envy that. But the experience was unbelievable, and I think that we all had. I never understood. You see it on some of the documentaries that feature Cicerone, and you hear it from other people, but the feeling of being done with the exam and just having completed it is kind of euphoric. It's just like, we did that. I mean, I just gave you a big old hug, and obviously 1,000 things are swirling in your mind right at the conclusion of it. And we've been racking our brains about what we thought we scored on certain parts of the exam for the whole week, against the advice of several people, but that's just how we're built. So that's, tough cookie. And yeah, I'm with you. I think that I'm going to be happy if despite missing passing, because I didn't have a particularly good tasting. I didn't, and I had one bad oral and one bad essay, and there's not a lot of places to hide on the exam. And I think that that's one lesson too, that whether or not the master exam is a huge jump in terms of content from the advanced exam, you have to get a higher score to pass it. And it's like taking the advanced exam twice back-to-back days, essentially. And so there's just less room for error. You can't screw up too much. And so I think most of the story of the exam is trying to minimize the spots where you have some big mess ups. And in the event that we're taking it again, or either of us are taking it again, I feel really good about solving that problem. So that's where we're at.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a beer picked out for next time. We haven't even. We were just really thinking about. I knew this was going to be a long episode. This feels like how long it takes me to talk about my experience with the exam with everybody who's asked. Because usually I get done and my spouse is kind of like, you realize you just did not stop talking and you told them probably way more than they wanted. And I was like, I don't care.
Yeah. Hey, it'll be on YouTube. You can put it on 2 times speed. It'll be fine.
That's right. Yeah. But, and if anybody has any questions, or you're thinking about taking it, we are like we kind of talked about before. We were thankful for anybody who was willing to meet with us and just answer any questions that we had, to the best of their ability. We weren't asking what were the questions or anything, but people are trying to give helpful advice, but they're also trying not to give away anything about the exam. So obviously we're kind of under those same parameters too, but always more than happy just to chat and just talk to people. If you're just thinking about taking it, reach out, ask us any questions. More than happy to talk to anyone. But if you for next episode, we'll post on social media, well before if we have a beer style or what we're going to do next. And so just make sure to follow us on Instagram, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we'll have some good news to talk about before Thanksgiving. That'd be nice.
Yeah. It sounds like we might have a chance, and it might even be, hopefully it's good news whether we passed or not. So
yeah,
hopefully
fair.
We don't have an episode that's a mea culpa about how we feel about the exam. So
we'll have a reason to drink beer either way. So
there you go.
It'll be good. All right. Cheers, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Cheers, friends.